spring did not arrive as warmth. It arrived as fracture, as hairline cracks along the frozen creek, and a slow thinning of the snowpack that revealed what winter had buried. And Caleb Mercer felt the change first in sound. The faint dripping beneath eaves, the distant groan of shifting ice, before he saw the darker patches of earth emerge through white. Weeks had passed since the fight on the flats, and his thigh had healed into a tight scar that pulled slightly with each long stride, a reminder of how close the young bear had come. The clearing had remained undisturbed since that morning, when he left the pelt at the tree line and allowed snow to claim it. Scavengers had eventually dragged it away in pieces, leaving only scattered tufts of fur caught in bark. He had not followed the trail. The body on the ridge had long since vanished beneath feeding cycles of raven and fox and thaw. Life had resumed its indifferent rhythm. Yet as ice along the creek began to split open under growing daylight, Caleb sensed something unsettled beneath the surface calm. Tracks returned to the valley with the melt, not large, not immediate threats, but signs of movement that had avoided the clearing through deep winter. Smaller prints along the far ridge, claw marks on bark near a stand of young spruce. Nothing that suggested a direct challenge, yet enough to remind him that territory never remained empty. He adjusted his patrol routes accordingly, moving farther north toward rocky ground, where the last confrontation had taken place. There, among exposed stone now free of snow, he found faint remnants of the fight. Dark stains dried into rock, scratched gouges where claws had struck. The marks felt older than weeks, as though time had stretched around them. He stood there longer than necessary, rifle resting loosely in his hands, and let the memory settle without resistance. The wind was softer now, carrying hints of thaw rather than ice. He turned to descend when a subtle movement caught his eye along the tree line below. He froze instantly, scanning the slope. At first he saw nothing distinct, only shadow shifting with breeze. Then he caught it, a shape smaller than the adult, leaner than the yearling had been at its peak, moving cautiously between trunks, not approaching the flats, not charging, simply passing through. Caleb felt his grip tighten reflexively. He lifted the rifle and steadied the sight toward the movement. Distance was moderate, angle clean. He exhaled slowly. The shape paused partially in view, revealing a narrow head and a shoulder not yet thick with full maturity. Not the same bear he had fought. This one moved differently. Less weight, less directness. It stopped briefly and looked toward the ridge where blood had once marked stone. Caleb's finger hovered near the trigger. One shot would end it before it could grow into another season of conflict. Wind drifted gently from him toward the animal. Scent would carry. The bear lifted its head slightly as if testing air, then turned without urgency and moved deeper into timber, vanishing beyond sight. Caleb held position for several seconds longer before lowering the rifle. The moment lingered heavily. The valley was not empty. It never had been. Winter had resolved one line of escalation, but spring revealed the continuity beneath it. He descended the ridge slowly, scanning for additional sign. Near the base, he found fresh tracks crossing an old game trail, smaller than the yearling's final stride, but large enough to mark growth ahead. He crouched and touched the edge of one impression. The soil beneath was damp and dark. This was recent. He straightened and looked across the valley toward his cabin, barely visible through thinning trees. A faint awareness pressed at the edge of thought. The hunt had ended, but the pattern remained. As evening approached, he returned to the clearing and paused at the doorway, listening to water drip steadily from the eaves. No scratching at the walls, no pacing at tree line. Yet beyond the open ground, beyond the softened ridge, life moved with quiet persistence. Caleb stepped inside and set the rifle against the wall, though he did not store it away. The scar along his thigh tightened as he moved. He flexed it once, testing strength. The land was shifting. Snow receded. Scents would travel differently. Boundaries would redraw themselves. And as twilight spread across thawing ground, he understood with quiet clarity that balance was never permanent here. It was only a pause between winters, a breath held before the next line of tracks appeared against the edge of the trees. Thaw did not soften the valley. It stripped it, pulling back the white veil that had muted sound and scent, and revealing the raw lines beneath. And with every patch of exposed earth, Caleb felt the tension rise again, rather than ease. The smaller tracks he had found along the ridge did not vanish with daylight. They multiplied. Over the next several mornings, he discovered fresh impressions crossing game trails, circling higher ground, pausing near the broken stone where the young bear had fallen months earlier. They were not wandering prints. They were deliberate. The new bear was mapping. Caleb moved with sharper intent now, pushing farther from the cabin at irregular hours, tracking the smaller predator before it could mature into the kind of force he had already survived twice. Yet each time he closed distance, the animal slipped away with unsettling precision, never allowing him a full, clear shot. It moved through brush with a fluid silence that felt learned rather than instinctive. One evening, under a sky bruised purple by sinking sun, he followed a fresh trail toward the thawing creek. Water ran high and fast now, ice breaking into jagged fragments that knocked hollow against stone. The tracks led dangerously close to the bank. Caleb advanced slowly, rifle raised, scanning the tree line where visibility thinned. The air carried damp earth and something else, faint musk sharpened by spring. He stepped onto a narrow stretch of exposed rock near the creek's bend and saw it at last. The bear stood across the rushing water, partially obscured by willow branches. It was larger than he had first judged, not yet fully grown, but no longer juvenile. Its shoulders carried emerging thickness. Its posture lacked the reckless uncertainty of a cub. It watched him openly. The sound of the creek filled the space between them like a barrier of noise. Caleb steadied the rifle and aimed across the current. Wind drifted unpredictably along the water's surface. He adjusted for distance and drop. This was the moment to end it, before growth hardened into challenge. He tightened his finger slowly. The bear did not retreat. Instead, it stepped closer to the bank, lowering its head as if considering the crossing. Caleb's pulse quickened. If it entered the water, he would have seconds to fire before current distorted sight. He inhaled, exhaled, and began the squeeze. At that exact instant, the bear surged forward, not across the creek, but downstream along the bank, disappearing behind brush. Caleb pivoted sharply, tracking through gaps between branches. He fired. The shot cracked above the roar of water. Bark splintered. No blood marked the brush. He moved quickly along the rock, seeking a clearer angle. Then the forest behind him exploded. A second presence burst from timber at his back, heavier, faster. Caleb spun instinctively. Too late. Massive weight collided with him from the side. They tumbled across wet stone and into the shallows. Icy water slammed into his chest, stealing breath. Claws raked along his shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin. He shoved the rifle upward between them and fired blindly. The muzzle flash flared against water spray. The bear recoiled but did not release fully. Caleb twisted violently, driving his knee upward into the animal's chest. The current pulled at both of them, dragging bodies against slick rock. He lost grip on the rifle. It vanished into churning water. The bear lunged again, jaws snapping inches from his face. He thrust his forearm forward to block and felt teeth close around leather and flesh. Pain tore through him like fire. He roared through clenched teeth and reached with his free hand for the knife at his belt. Fingers found the handle just as the bear reared to strike. He plunged the blade upward into the thick fur beneath the jaw, driving with desperate force. The animal roared and thrashed. Water turned red in swirling eddies. Caleb wrenched the blade free and struck again toward the throat. The bear staggered backward onto the slick bank, slipping but not falling. Blood poured from the wound in heavy dark streams. For a split second they faced each other through spray and noise. Caleb scrambled toward the bank, half crawling out of the current. The bear charged once more, despite the gash beneath its jaw. He rolled aside at the last instant. Claws tore into earth where he had been. He lunged for a fallen branch thick as his forearm and swung it upward into the bear's muzzle. Bone cracked against wood. The impact staggered the animal long enough for him to drive the knife again into its throat at near point-blank range. This time, the blade sank deeper. The bear's weight collapsed against him. They hit the ground together, breath hot and violent against his face. Claws dug into soil. Then gradually the force weakened. The body trembled and grew heavy. Caleb shoved himself free and staggered back, chest heaving, blood mixing with creek water along his torn sleeve. The bear lay on its side at the edge of the bank, limbs twitching in diminishing bursts. Seconds stretched painfully long before stillness took hold. Caleb stood there soaked and shaking, knife hanging loosely in his grip, staring at the fallen shape. Downstream, the first bear he had aimed at earlier stood partially visible across the water, watching from shadow. It had not attacked. It had driven him into position. And now it remained there, eyes fixed on the body beside him. Realization struck like another blow. There had been two all along. Not one continuation, but a pair. The surviving cub from years ago had not been alone. The second shape turned slowly and disappeared into timber without sound. Caleb remained on the bank, water dripping from torn clothing, blood seeping from his forearm and shoulder, watching the empty space where it had stood. The creek roared between them, indifferent. Spring had not softened the conflict. It had multiplied it. And as dusk deepened along the valley, Caleb understood with brutal clarity that the balance he believed resolved beneath winter snow had only shifted into something more dangerous, something that now moved in pairs. The water felt colder once the violence stopped, as if the creek reclaimed its temperature the moment the body beside him went still. And Caleb remained crouched on the muddy bank longer than he realized, chest heaving, knife still locked in his grip. The fallen bear lay half in shadow, throat opened by steel, blood thinning into the current that carried it downstream in diluted ribbons. Across the water, the second shape had vanished, but the space where it stood felt charged, as though eyes still watched from between trunks. Caleb forced himself upright, despite the tremor in his legs. His forearm burned, where teeth had broken through leather, punctures deep enough to leak steadily. He tore a strip from his already ruined sleeve and wrapped it tight around the wound, jaw clenched as pressure forced blood to slow. The rifle was gone, swept by the current. He scanned the surface briefly, but the dark shape of it had already vanished beneath broken ice and rushing melt. The loss tightened something inside him. He was not prepared for this escalation. Two bears, coordinated, one drawing his attention across the creek while the other attacked from behind. This was no coincidence. This was learning refined into strategy. He stepped cautiously toward the body and rolled it fully onto the bank, ensuring final stillness. The bear was larger than the tracks on the ridge had suggested, shoulders thickening with spring growth. It had attacked without hesitation, aiming to disable rather than bluff. Caleb wiped the blade against his torn jacket and sheathed it slowly. Wind shifted through willows with a low hiss. Every branch movement felt amplified. He scanned the tree line carefully, searching for the second presence. Nothing revealed itself. No movement. No snap of twig. Yet the absence felt deliberate. He knew now that the surviving bear would not rush blindly into open ground. It had seen what happened. It had watched its sibling fall. The realization settled like ice beneath his ribs. This was no longer a contest of territory. It had become something sharper. He began moving along the bank cautiously, putting distance between himself and the fallen body. He needed higher ground and a weapon. The cabin lay nearly a mile away. He moved slower than usual, blood loss and cold combining to weaken each step. Twice he stopped to listen, convinced he heard faint movement trailing him through timber. Once he glimpsed a flicker of brown between trunks parallel to his path, but when he pivoted fully, the forest returned to stillness. It was pacing him now, maintaining distance just beyond clear sight. The strategy mirrored the adult's long-ago patience. He quickened his pace despite the pull of his stitched thigh scar. Branches whipped lightly at his face as he pushed through denser brush. At one point, a low growl carried faintly from somewhere upslope. Not close enough to attack, but close enough to remind. Caleb refused to run. Running invited pursuit. Instead, he altered direction abruptly, cutting across a rocky incline to disrupt any mirrored line. Minutes later, he found fresh tracks angling to compensate. The bear was adapting in real time. Anger flared beneath his exhaustion. He reached a small rise overlooking the valley and paused, chest rising and falling heavily. From there, he could see the line of the creek glinting faintly through trees. The fallen body remained out of sight. The second bear did not reveal itself, yet the sensation of observation pressed hard. He drew the knife again, gripping it tighter than before. Without the rifle, he felt stripped down to instinct. The cabin finally came into view beyond the clearing. Relief flickered but did not settle. Open ground meant exposure. He stepped from timber cautiously, scanning every edge. No movement. He crossed the clearing quickly and reached the door, slipping inside and barring it with shaking hands. Once inside, he leaned against the wood and listened. Silence. No immediate charge. He moved to the back wall and retrieved the heavier rifle he had stored there months ago, checking the chamber with steady precision despite fatigue. Then he returned to the window and lifted the edge of the covering. At the far tree line, barely visible in fading light, a shape stood motionless. The surviving bear. Larger than the one that attacked him, broader through the chest. It did not approach. It did not retreat. It stood in profile, watching the cabin. Caleb felt something shift inside him, a recognition that the pattern had come full circle. Years ago, a cub had watched him from tree line after he shot its mother. Now another watched him after he killed its sibling. He raised the rifle slowly and aligned the sight across the clearing. Distance was long but manageable, wind minimal. One clean shot could end the line entirely. His forearm throbbed, blood seeped faintly through the binding. The bear did not move. It held its ground, gaze fixed on the cabin. Seconds stretched into something heavy. Caleb tightened his grip and began to apply pressure to the trigger. At that exact moment, the bear shifted slightly, angling its body just enough to narrow exposure. Not retreating, not charging. Waiting. Caleb felt hesitation creep into the motion of his finger. He remembered the creak, the coordinated attack, the calculated draw. This animal would not fall easily, and if he wounded it without anchoring the shot, the next confrontation would be closer, more lethal. The silence thickened between them. Twilight deepened, shadows merging with fur. Eventually the bear turned slowly, stepping back into timber without breaking eye contact until darkness swallowed its shape. Caleb lowered the rifle but did not step away from the window. The valley had shifted again. This was no longer about winter balance. This was inheritance. The line he started years ago had not ended twice. It had multiplied. Outside, the forest absorbed the final light of day, and somewhere within it, the last surviving bear moved with quiet, deliberate steps, not charging, not retreating, but choosing ground for whatever would come next. Night did not fall gently over the valley. It pressed down like a weight, sealing tree line and ridge into a single dark wall beyond the clearing. And Caleb Mercer remained at the window long after the surviving bear dissolved into shadow. His forearm throbbed beneath the tight bandage, shoulder burned where claws had torn through fabric, and the scar along his thigh pulsed in dull rhythm with memory. The cabin felt smaller than it ever had before, walls no longer a boundary, but a temporary pause between movements outside. He understood now with brutal clarity that this was no longer about a single season of escalation, nor about dominance carved into snow. This was continuity. The line he started years ago when he squeezed a trigger into a clearing had never truly broken. It had branched. And somewhere beyond the trees, a bear that had watched its sibling die now moved with patience sharpened by loss. Caleb stepped away from the window and moved through the cabin deliberately, gathering ammunition, checking the heavier rifle again, reinforcing the door bar, though he knew wood would not stop what truly wanted entry. Wind brushed lightly across the roof, carrying the damp scent of thawing earth. Spring had opened the valley, and with it, possibility. Near midnight, the first sound came. Not a charge, not an impact, but a slow compression of snow at the tree line. Caleb froze. The rhythm was steady, deliberate. He did not rush to the door. Instead, he extinguished the lamp and let darkness fill the room, allowing his eyes to adjust. The steps continued, closing distance without hurry. This was not reckless aggression. It was a test. He moved to the side of the window and lifted the covering just enough to see. The surviving bear stood at the edge of the clearing, larger than he had first judged, shoulders broad, head held low. Moonlight caught faintly along the ridge of its back. It did not advance further. It watched. The stillness between them carried years of blood and winter and silence. Caleb raised the rifle slowly, aligning the sight across open ground. Distance was long but not impossible. Wind drifted faintly from him toward the bear. One clean shot could close the line. His finger tightened against the trigger, breath steady. The bear shifted slightly, angling its body to narrow exposure exactly as its sibling had done on the flats. The movement was not coincidence. It was inheritance. Caleb felt a tremor, not of fear, but of recognition. If he fired and missed, if he wounded rather than anchored, the next encounter would not be measured at distance. It would be at the door, in the dark, where hesitation ended lives. Seconds stretched. The valley held its breath. Then the bear did something unexpected. It stepped forward once, just once, onto open snow, and stopped. No roar, no charge, simply presence. Caleb's finger tightened further, the rifle steadied. The past pressed hard behind his eyes. The sow falling, the cub running, the adult on the ridge, the young one at the creek. Every winter condensed into this line of sight. The bear held its ground. The silence thickened. And then slowly, deliberately, Caleb eased pressure from the trigger. He did not lower the rifle completely, but he did not fire. Outside, the bear remained still for several heartbeats more, before turning its head slightly toward the dark forest behind it. Without haste, without breaking the tension entirely, it stepped backward once, then twice, retreating into shadow, until only the faintest outline remained. Caleb kept the rifle raised long after it vanished. The clearing returned to stillness. Wind moved softly across thawing ground. He lowered the weapon at last and leaned back against the wall, breath leaving him in a slow, controlled exhale. This was not surrender. It was recognition. The valley did not belong to him, nor to any single predator. It belonged to endurance. Winter would come again. Tracks would form again. Lines would cross again. But the cycle did not need another shot tonight. He stepped outside just before dawn, rifle resting at his side, and stood in the center of the clearing as the first pale light stretched across the trees. No fresh prints marked the snow. No shadow lingered at the ridge. Only open space and the long quiet of Alaska. He turned in a slow circle, taking in cabin, creek, ridge, tree line. Years of conflict had carved him harder, but they had not broken him. Somewhere beyond sight, the bear moved deeper into forest, alive. The hunt had not ended in a body this time. It had ended in choice. Caleb walked back inside as the sun edged higher, closing the door gently behind him. Outside, the valley remained vast and indifferent, holding no memory of who hunted and who survived, only the promise that balance was never permanent, only earned, lost, and earned again. And somewhere out there, beneath a sky that never truly forgot, the next winter was already waiting.